Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everybody. I'm Isabel Fletcher. I'm a researcher in, what's my job title? Social Science and Food Systems, based at the University of Edinburgh. And this is a kind of a very different presentation from the last couple that were very interesting. But I'm going to talk about a toolkit that I was part of the team that developed. And when I get the navigation right, next slide. So I'm going to talk a bit about why we do inter and transdisciplinary research. This is kind of probably very basic to all of you, but it sets the scene for thinking about the different kinds of research that are involved in social challenges and particularly in addressing sustainability concerns. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the Shape ID toolkit and why I think it might be useful for you. I'm going to talk about one key resource collection, which is co-creating a research project. There are others that I think are relevant that I will highlight, but this one I think will be most useful to people attending this workshop. And then I'm going to mention a further resource that you might be interested in. So, why fund inter and transdisciplinary research? Why do it? Why is it got such a high profile? And why do we as researchers and universities want to undertake it? Partly because it is seen as the way of solving complex global challenges, as this quote from the Royal Society illustrates. And the reason I put that image of men on the moon is because the moonshot analogy is used a lot in these discussions. It's a kind of seen as a way, inter and transdisciplinary research is a way of bringing together many disciplines to solve a complex problem in an accelerated time frame. Whether or not, sorry, my slides were not supposed to be animated, but we'll see whether Zoom carries on doing this. So, transdisciplinary research addresses societal challenges, provides solutions to complex and difficult social problems. And it's not the only reason why people do inter and transdisciplinary research, but I guess it's one of the reasons why you are all interested in doing it, because of the nature, the theme of this workshop. And particularly for sustainability research, there seemed to be a need for transdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary approaches, because we need the knowledge and participation of stakeholders. We need their knowledge to understand problems, and we need them to take up the research results to change the world. And I like this quote from John Robinson, which I pulled off the University of Utrecht website. There's a kind of a page on why do transdisciplinary research, and I think that puts it really nicely. And just so that we get our kind of our models, our ducks lined up in a row, you would say in English, our models of research, at least in some order, because these terms are very contested. There are definitions of interdisciplinarity that float around, but often these terms are used very loosely. And I like this diagram from LERO, which is the League of European Research Universities, about that lines up ideas in terms of degrees of collaboration between disciplines, starting with single disciplines and going all the way to transdisciplinarity. And as LERO points out, these different degrees of collaboration involve different research methods, different ways of dealing with the relationships between the disciplines and the knowledge that is created. I'm not going to go into this in any more detail, but I think it's helpful to be aware of this kind of increasing complexity of the research process. Often, as I said, the terms inter and transdisciplinarity aren't often very well defined. They're used quite loosely, particularly in funding literature. And there are a lot of other terms that are used. And this is partly because different communities of academic practice, well, academic and other sector practice, use these terms and have developed ideas of good practice around them. And so other terms you may find that are used are collaborative research, co-production, you may well be familiar with that, cross-boundary working, but also particularly in an American context and around biomedical science, team science, or the science of team science. And these are, they overlap with models of inter- and transdisciplinarity. And there are lots we can learn from each other, but the communities aren't necessarily very well connected always. So that was a kind of rapid introduction to ideas about inter- and transdisciplinarity. Now I want to talk about the Shape ID toolkit. And Shape ID was a European Commission funded project that ran from 2019 to 2021. And its kind of remit was to improve the integration of the arts, humanities, and social science in inter- and transdisciplinary research, which is usually dominated by STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and medicine. So that's quite a big mouthful. What I want to suggest is that even if you're not in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, there are useful resources in our toolkit. So because of these kind of disparate communities of research and practice that I talked about earlier, there's a lot of literature on how to do inter- and transdisciplinarity. What there isn't so much is guides to that literature, and that's a key goal of our toolkit, was to provide people who are new to the area with pathways through the literature to highlight what we thought was the most useful resources. So we wanted to inspire and motivate those who are not so far been involved in inter- and transdisciplinary research. We wanted to inform and instruct a range of different users, from individual researchers to research institutions to funders, and to those outside academia who wanted to be involved in such research. And as I said, to provide guidance and signposting to existing researchers. We did not want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to point people to what we thought were a lot of excellent resources that already existed. So, as I said, key features, not surprisingly, a gateway to new and existing resources, some guided pathways. I'll show you the structure of the toolkit in a minute, but we tell you, according to your interests, we structure it and then provide you a little bit of information so you can see whether you're interested in the resources we're presenting. Different entry points depending on your role and your interests and your search strategy, and a variety of resource formats. There's a lot of text in the toolkit. Academia runs on written text, but we have tried to include videos and podcasts and webinars, and some downloadable guides. We wrote some of our own material, and we found that there were missing gaps of kind of synthesis of best practice and kind of collective wisdom. And we did try and design it for sustainability. That's an ongoing issue. So this is what the toolkit looks like, and that's the website address. Please do go have a look if you think this sounds interesting and useful. We've tried very hard to make it straightforward and easy to use, and I'll explain a bit more about that in the following slides. So as I said, it's designed for different users in mind, and our 4 key groups of users are research individuals, research organisations, research funders and policymakers, and societal partners, those outside of academia who might want to take part in inter- and transdisciplinary research. And we've structured it around a series of, we started calling them tasks, and then one of the projects suggested that goals might be a more attractive way of describing it rather than tasks, which sounds a bit punitive. So they're goals. And these are really kind of practical outcomes. What is interdisciplinary research and why do it? How to create collaborative conditions and co-create a research project, and how to fund, support, and evaluate interdisciplinary research and the researchers who work in these fields. And different kind of resources we have, the guided pathways. As I said, I'll talk about a bit more. But there's also, we created some resources of our own. The top 10 tips are kind of collective wisdom from the project group on how to best conduct interdisciplinary research, to fund it, to evaluate it, to support researchers. We also have some case studies focusing particularly on the arts, humanities, and social sciences. Some downloadable guides to particular topics that we thought would be of interest. The FAQ is another way of navigating the website, and the guided tours give people kind of short introduction to what resources might be available to them. And so now I want to go on to talk about a key resource collection that I think would be of most interest to this audience, and that's co-create a research project. So this is what, if you click on one of those goals, this is what you get. You get a kind of banner headline and a short summary of what the topic is about, what the goal will discuss. And it also suggests other related goals that you may be interested in. And below that, wind back a little, the head of the page has some resource headlines, most headlights, most of which we have created. So there's a short video by one of our expert panel on overcoming the barriers to transdisciplinary research, and another one on how to develop collaborations with societal partners. And there's a recording of a webinar. We did a series of webinar called Transdisciplinary Dialogues, and this one is on research partnerships for impact. Below that, on the same page, is this what our web designers called accordions. So it's a short list of topics, kind of subtopics within this goal. Partnerships with artists and creative practitioners, partnerships with citizens, partnerships with enterprise. These were our key stakeholder groups for Shape ID. And so if you click on one of these accordion lines, you get this kind of a short blurb and then links very directly to the resources that we are highlighting. And in this case, the first couple of these are produced by the Swiss Academy of Arts and Sciences, who are a major funder of transdisciplinary research in Europe. And then there's another video. They're not all videos. This is just coincidence. And there's another video of participants at the International Transdisciplinary Conference explaining why we need to include societal actors to solve complex problems such as sustainability. So this is guiding you to resources that we think are particularly useful when thinking about how to co-create a research project and how to involve stakeholders. We also, as I said, developed some of our own resources. So this is one that's a kind of a reflective tool. It's questions to think about at the beginning of a collaborative research project. And it starts from the really basic. Does everyone know who all the partners in the project are and what they will bring to it? And this comes out of I wrote this one, but this comes out of my direct experience. I've been in interdisciplinary research projects where I didn't know who all the partners were, and that makes participating really difficult. And it goes through that series of quite practical questions, but also considering things like what the shared understanding of the project's aims might be. Has it been stated and agreed upon? To final question about what does success look like for this project. So it's both the very nitty-gritty and the kind of quite large conceptual issues involved in beginning a collaborative project. And a final resource I want to talk about from the toolkit comes from another goal, which is developing collaborative conditions. And this is written by Christian Paul, who's at ETH, who's a kind of leading expert on transdisciplinary research and sustainability in Europe. And he provided us with top 10 tips for working in multi-stakeholder collaborations. And so there's some really useful tips in here, from who to include, where to meet, how to think about the possibilities of participation for stakeholders, through to starting to consider the methods we'll use to co-produce the research. And I think these resources, we've been told these resources are very helpful because they summarize existing research and collective practical wisdom about how to conduct inter and transdisciplinary research. So that's a kind of rapid tour of the toolkit. I hope you will have a look for yourself, explore it, and find helpful resources on there. And finally, and this is new to me, I don't normally do self-promotion, but as further reading, if you're interested in this topic, two of my Shape ID colleagues and I produced a book. It's a reader. It's based on our work on the toolkit. So it uses the same structure as the toolkit around the goals. And what we've done is kind of put excerpts of what we think is key existing articles and writing in this area. And we've added a commentary from people working in the field of inter- and transdisciplinary research for each chapter. So there are 9 chapters structured around the goals I showed you before. Each has a brief introduction and then a commentary at the end from somebody working in the field. And we also have an open access introduction that talks about the kind of current state, the field of inter- and transdisciplinary research. So if you want to read more, I present you with this. And thank you very much. I hope this has been interesting, informative. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Isabel. Definitely both of that, interesting and informative. It's been fascinating. Thank you. I particularly liked, I think it was partway through, your 6 resource boxes. It's just so clear, really. It just felt like they were exactly the sort of things that people would need. And I guess it's often easy to go into collaborative projects and you, as you say, you don't really think, I don't know who else is involved here. So having that very clear checklist would, I imagine, just be such a great starting point.
As I said, that came directly out of my experience. I've been to meetings where projects have shifting collections of researchers involved, and I'm like, I don't know who you are or what you're doing here.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons I find inter- and transdisciplinarity really interesting, because it's kind of, some of it's very mundane. It's about the nuts and bolts. Who's here? Do they know each other? Have they talked to each other before? And some of it's very kind of conceptual. It's about how do we integrate our knowledge?
All sorts of things. I'll start with one question that I've got, and that is, of the 4 types of users that you mentioned that you were targeting, which ones have shown the most interest so far?
Researchers and funders. So we've had, the feedback we've had is that individual researchers have found it useful. So I mentioned the resources we created. We didn't expect to write anything for this toolkit. And actually, those resources have been quite popular, but funders. So we've been involved in, we talked to LERU. Again, they're producing another report on interdisciplinarity. We've talked to the OECD, who produced a report on transdisciplinarity. And we talked to groups of universities like Coimbra, which is a group of European universities, and I don't remember the acronym for it at all. and we've done training for funders within the EU, and so they've actually been really interested in the contents of this toolkit, partly because it's filling some gaps around. There's still quite a lot of gaps around the funding of this kind of research, but also around how you evaluate it, how you judge what makes good intern transdisciplinary research. The societal partners have been less engaged, and the feedback we got is that's because we're mostly writing for researchers and how they work with societal partners. And that's because we were a group of researchers writing this, and this is about who you are when you produce something. If we were going to do another version of it, we would need to engage with societal partners much earlier in the process of writing the toolkit. But this was it wasn't a big project, and we wrote the toolkit in about 6 months. So there's a limit to what you can do.
That was actually going to be my next question as to how long that you've dedicated to this. So there's my answer.
It was about 6 months. So it was one of the major outputs of a 2-year project, but the actual process of writing it was about 6 months. But we don't have any funding to maintain it. We tried to find a home for it in future. And we're not exactly updating, we're keeping it ticking over. But this is a problem. There are lots of dead toolkits in the world, and we don't want this to become one of them. And this is a problem when you fund people to produce something, but then you don't fund them to maintain it.
Yes, I can see that. Before I forget, I just want, because we have 2 other rooms here today, would you mind very much if I shared your final slide at some stage with your book, just to the other participants? Excellent.
We'll publicity. I'm having to learn to publicize myself better, or our work better, actually, I should say. So yeah, no, please do.
And apologies if I missed this at the start, but I was curious to know your expert panel, where else were they solely from the University of Edinburgh? Or although I think, sorry, you mentioned perhaps collaborators in the Netherlands, maybe?
Yeah, so it was Trinity College Dublin, University of Edinburgh, ETH Zurich, Jack Spappen, who's a consultant in the Netherlands, and Isinova, who are based in Italy. So there was a five partner project, but our expert panel came from, we had people from the States, so Michael O'Rourke, who runs a network, the name of which has just gone out of my head. But no, we had also a person from Australia who runs the integration. I've just lost all my names at once, but yes, no, we had quite an international panel, and they were really helpful because we produced a version of the toolkit and then showed them it, and they said, that doesn't work. So it's one of my big learnings from doing this was it's really helpful to present your kind of initial results to somebody, or your initial ideas to somebody, and then have them say, no, you need to rethink bits of this. It improved our toolkit enormously presenting it to our panel.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We shall definitely promote that. Let's make this one toolkit that does not go off to die, so it can continue to be used.
Thank you very much appreciated.
Now that actually concludes our meeting room 3 for